Hello, everyone. My name is Corey Walker. I'm the Northern Regional Coordinator for AutismBC. I've been with AutismBC since December of 2012. And for the month of April, we've been doing for the last couple of months a new concept called Theme Months, where each month on our social media we're featuring a different theme to try and get more engagement with you, our members, and to provide more information to you and find out better ways that we can support you. And so for April, I'm one of the people in charge of the April theme. Our theme this month is Amplifying Autistic Voices. And I felt like I was a good one to help take on the theme because I'm actually an autistic self-advocate myself. I'm the only autistic employee currently at AutismBC. And I was diagnosed as an adult back in 2001. But enough about me. I'm here today to interview Trudy Goold, who's an autistic self-advocate from St. John's, Newfoundland, and someone I know Trudy a little bit through some shared work we do on the national scene, but I don't want to steal all Trudy's thunder. So yeah, Trudy is, like I said, she's an autistic self-advocate, St. John's, Newfoundland, and I'm going to let her talk more about herself. So welcome, Trudy.
Thanks, Corey. And thank you, AutismBC.
Yes. I thought a great way to start off was for you to tell us about yourself, maybe about your autism journey, your background, work. And I'm curious about when were you first diagnosed and what circumstances led to your diagnosis?
Well, Corey knows some of this already because this is how I always tend to introduce myself when it comes to autistic advocacy. I graduated high school the year Asperger's was put in the DSM-4. So my mother actually went to the Geneva Center for Autism because we were living in Toronto at the time, and said, I think my daughter has Asperger's. And they asked how old I was, and she said 18. And they said, oh, she'll grow out of it. We found out just recently, just a few years ago, that the reason we were told that is because they had no funding for adults at the time. This was back in 1994.
Yeah.
No one thought about adult autistics then, wow. Despite Temple Grandin's presence. So I don't know why they told us that particular lie as opposed to saying, I'm sorry, we don't have anything available for adult autistics, but so it goes. The next time I tried to get the assessment was sort of in 2000, 2001. Wasn't quite sure exactly. I can't quite remember exactly what year it was, just that it was around that time. My coping skills were not doing too well at the time, and my brother had seen an interview in the New York Times with Tony Attwood, who was the voice of Asperger's at the time.
Absolutely, he is, yeah.
So I went down to Queen Street Mental Health, still living in Toronto, and had an hour-and-a-half interview with one of the psychiatrists there. And after he finished tallying up my answers or with whatever he was looking at, he said, well, if you're an Aspie, you're the most well-adjusted Aspie I've ever met.
Not very helpful.
Yeah. I was looking for a bit more help than that.
So what did you do after that then? You didn't give up, obviously.
Well, I did for a while, actually.
Okay.
I just sort of didn't know where to go from there, so I put it to the back of my mind and didn't really identify myself as autistic at the time. So I tried to find a few other coping mechanisms that also didn't help a lot, but I sort of managed.
Okay.
And then my younger sister decided to become a speech pathologist, speech language pathologist.
Yeah.
And it was sort of a circuitous route she ended up taking. After she got her bachelor's, she didn't get into a master's program,
okay,
which is what's needed for speech language pathology.
Yeah.
So she went and did what's called a communications disorders assistant diploma
Okay.
at Durham College in Oshawa. And in the spring of 2007, I think it was a 2-year program, and that was her first year, she sent me 3 documents on autism.
Wow.
That
Okay.
because they'd been learning about
Yeah.
autism in that section.
Yeah.
And I managed to read through 1.5 of them and burst into tears.
Yeah.
I just had an absolute meltdown.
Wow.
And we figured out later that the reason that had happened was relief.
Okay.
I read these, and almost every single one, I was like, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. So I wasn't alone. There were other people like me out there.
That's always a good feeling.
Yeah. I still didn't manage to get a diagnosis at the time. But that was when I sort of started to self-identify as autistic.
Okay.
I sort of went, okay, well, that's so much me. And we thought about it before, so that's how I began self-identifying. Then in 2011, my parents moved me to Newfoundland because I lost my job a 1.5 years before, and due to various reasons, and they couldn't afford to keep supporting me in Toronto.
Yeah.
Being a very expensive city, and they just moved to St. John's a couple of years before. So in August 2011, I moved down to St. John's, Newfoundland, and the youngest sister had just finished her master's degree at that time, but she'd done it in the States.
Okay.
And in order to practice in the States, you don't need to have an anatomy and physiology course.
Okay.
In order to practice as an SLP in Canada, you need to have an anatomy and physiology course.
Oh,
you need to go
okay.
through one of those.
Yeah.
So she decided to take it at Memorial University here in St.
Yeah.
John's. So she and I were both living with my parents at the time then. And she and my mom were looking everywhere for help in order to get me diagnosed. Because I wasn't working. I was having a fair amount of difficulties in terms of sensory stuff and meltdowns. And
Yeah.
sorry if you can hear that banging noise. That's what my new cat.
No problem.
And we were looking and looking, and all we could find were child psychologists, child developmental specialists.
That seems to be a common story across Canada, sadly.
Yeah. So finally, I asked a friend of mine how they got diagnosed. And they mentioned a psychiatric outpatient clinic run at one of the hospitals here.
Yeah.
So I gathered my material, the tests that I knew about determining whether one was autistic or not, and the various online things I'd done, and went down there and said, here's what you need to do in order to diagnose me with Asperger's syndrome, because it was 2012 at the time.
Yeah.
Please diagnose me.
Yeah.
So a couple of weeks going in for meetings and stuff with them, and them going through things and finding the information, the rest of the information they needed to do that. And that's when I got my official diagnosis.
Quite a long journey.
Yeah, beginning of March 2012.
Wow.
So really, that was 18 years from the time my mom first went, wait a minute, until when I managed to get my diagnosis.
Wow. That's quite a long process.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I self-identified as autistic starting in 2007.
Yeah.
So I didn't do a lot of research at the time. At the time, I just thought it was the sensory issues and the social challenges, the difficulties with body language and social communication.
Okay.
It wasn't until after my official diagnosis that I started learning about the other stuff involved with being autistic, like the executive functioning difficulties.
Yeah.
At which point I went, wow, okay, no wonder I have so much difficulty keeping my apartment clean.
Yes.
So that was my journey to diagnosis. And then after that, after my official diagnosis, which we got in part because in order to get the disability tax credit and the RDSP,
Yeah.
so that I would actually have money when I hit my 60s and 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
So I started looking at the blogs of other autistic adults because I was kind of like, okay, is it really just the sensory issues and the social issues? Because I think there's more going on. And like my parents had got a bunch of books to read through, books written by autistics. So I read through some of those, and then I started looking at the blogs of other autistic adults. And that's when I found out about executive functioning issues that we tend to have. I spent a couple of years really looking at executive functioning and how it affects us and stuff. And so that was when I really, really went, oh, okay. So I'm not having issues with laziness. I'm not really having, well, I do have issues with procrastination, but that's not the only thing involved in sort of making sure I clean my environment, making sure I finish things I start, making decisions. A lot of that is executive functioning.
Yes.
Like initiation of things, motivation to continue things, knowing when to stop doing things, knowing how to stop, weighing different sides. Basically, anything that has to do with decision making is involved in executive functioning. Executive functioning is involved throughout. Planning and organization, all of that. That's all executive functioning.
Interesting. So yeah, I guess your life probably changed for the better because you had the answers you've been seeking. Now that you had the official diagnosis, you'd be able to go and get support and stuff too. So how was that? I imagine though, being an adult, that it still wasn't that easy to find support even after the diagnosis.
No, I mean, I participated in the Autism Society has this group of, at the time it was specified Asperger syndrome adults.
Yeah.
Now it's autistic adults.
Yeah.
Who don't have a large number of challenges. So the sort of lesser severity levels.
Yeah.
Get together and chat or do things, go out to movies, go out on walks, go to coffee shops, occasionally have dinner together, that type of thing. So I started going to that, and that's how I met one of my best friends here.
Cool.
And for a while, we had a group that did social thinking, and basically Michelle Garcia Winner's social thinking course type of thing.
Yeah.
And we had a social group, which was a couple of autistics at the time, ones whom the facilitators thought would work well together, would mesh well together, would get together and for an hour a week or an hour and a half a week and just chat about various things, play board games, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So there was that for a few years. But I still haven't been able to find an occupational therapist who can help me with some of the sensory issues. I did manage to find a psychologist who could help. And a psychologist trained in dealing with adult autistics.
Okay.
So I currently see her sort of on the order of every 5 to 6 weeks, depending on how my life is going.
Yeah.
And a psychiatrist who has some training in dealing with autistics.
Yeah.
But a lot of it, Mom and I had to find on our own.
Wow.
And I mean, my youngest sister, who moved back to Toronto, and she practices in the sort of North York, Vaughan, Peel region.
Yeah.
For anyone who knows Southern Ontario, she also helps. I mean, she'll point me towards resources that she finds. But really, what ended up helping the most, I found, were the blogs of other autistic adults.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's how I started to get into advocacy, really.
Cool.
Is I went, these are so much help to me. I think I have a personal obligation to sort of pay it forward.
Yeah.
So that's when I created my own autistic blog. And I'll go into more detail later on in the session about that and some of the other resources that I found and such.
So that's cool. Now you've talked about some of the challenges that you faced and how you attempted to overcome them, and sometimes it was, well, in most cases it sounds like it wasn't that easy, and that seems to be common here in BC as well for adults. Were there any other challenges that you faced, and maybe I'm particularly curious, challenges you faced as a child before you started thinking about autism, and what strategies you used successfully or unsuccessfully at that time?
Well, first thing you got to know is males and females actually present differently when it comes to spectrum traits.
That is true.
Females tend to be better mimics. Just as a casual example, we would come down to Newfoundland every summer because all my mom's family lived here.
Yeah.
And one of my mom's sisters has a semi-strong Newfoundland accent. And when we go back to Toronto, I would be talking like her for the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Every so often, I'd end up using a word and I'd have a strong Newfie accent on that. Our friend Patricia, one day a couple of years ago, my dad dropped me off after visiting himself and my mom, and I said something, and it was like, I just sounded exactly like Patricia. Word choice, tone,
Wow.
inflection, everything. I sounded exactly like Patricia.
Wow.
Just two sort of examples of females actually have a gift for mimicking. And that gift can be useful in terms of masking
Yeah.
the autistic traits.
Yeah.
And the other thing about females is usually we don't show any sort of huge red warning flags until the ages of about 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Males tend to show sort of between 2 and 4, if they're verbal.
Yeah.
If they have verbal skills, and I very definitely had verbal skills. But if we're verbal, girls don't tend to show until between 5 and 6. That's when we sort of reach our limit of, okay, we can communicate socially sort of until that time. We sort of match our peers in ability.
Yeah.
After that time, after about 5 to 6, that's when things start to break down. When we can no longer manage to match our peers' development in terms of social skills, in terms of reading body language and all that.
Okay.
So before sort of kindergarten, grade 1, I had friends. I was a fairly social child.
Yeah.
After that, not so much. And I mean, I wanted friends, but I was different. My brain and the way I thought about things worked differently. So for years, all throughout elementary school, I had maybe one friend at a time. And unfortunately, I tended to suffocate those friends.
Wow.
So, sorry, that wasn't great. And I mean, my best friend as a young child, we ended up going to different schools, and we just sort of drifted apart.
Oh, that's sad.
And I think I went through 3 friends throughout elementary school.
Wow.
And as I said, only one at a time.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know how to cope with more than one. And of course, in terms of the suffocating, I really didn't know how to play in a group. So I didn't play much with the group. So I wanted to spend all my time with my friend, but that didn't allow that friend to play in groups, type of thing. So other than that, I turned to books. Science fiction and fantasy books became my escape.
Cool.
And because of the way I thought, because of the way my brain worked, because I was intelligent, I also had bullies.
Yeah.
The worst was an incident that I no longer remember. The only reason I know it existed is because of the after effects, and my mom has told me that I told her about it.
Oh, okay.
I was in grade 1, and a couple of girls, I can't remember, I think they were a grade or 2 older than I was, took me behind the hills of the playground one day and made me strip.
Oh, dear.
And they must have said something about the fact that I wore skirts.
Yeah.
Because after that, I refused to wear a skirt or dress for the next 3 years.
Wow.
And I mean, then about halfway through grade 1, we got a new principal at our school, and she was very good. She dealt with bullying very, very well.
Good.
As a contrast to the principal we'd had. So that was, the bullying died down but didn't disappear. Then in high school was easier for me.
Okay.
Because I managed to get into a school where everyone was intelligent. You had to pass a test
Yeah.
to get in, and there were only 78 kids every year. There's now
Wow.
100 kids
Small
every
school.
year.
Wow.
So I was with people who shared my high intelligence level, and a lot of them were also sort of introverts, which made things a bit easier for me. So
Yeah.
I ended up with best friends, a couple of best friends, and several acquaintances whom I could just talk to in class and do projects with and stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, I've always heard sort of high school years are awful and everything, whereas for me, the high school years were my best school years.
Oh, good.
But also other things I faced as a kid and even now as an adult, I'm very sensitive to light. Even on a cloudy day, if I go outside, I need sunglasses.
Yeah.
You'll probably remember from our meetings that I often wore sunglasses even inside.
I don't remember that, but that's okay.
Just, I'm sensitive to certain sounds. I can't stand opera. It makes me feel nauseous for some reason. High-pitched and loud sounds.
There.
Sorry?
I don't think you're alone when it comes to not being able to stand opera.
I can't tolerate spicy stuff, the hot spicy stuff, at all. It doesn't even sort of matter if it's just a little bit spicy.
Oh, wow.
I can't really tolerate that.
You don't like my cooking then.
And as I mentioned before, the executive function, the problems keeping my environment clean, I have to have a cleaning lady come in. So this is a hard time for me in terms of that.
Yeah, I'm not very good at keeping clean either. I had a cleaning lady who was going to come in, and then with this COVID, I had to cancel her. So in the meantime, things are kind of piling up.
Mm-hmm. Know what you mean.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things can be definite challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
And one thing that I sometimes talk about is we have a fairly big family. Like I have 3 siblings.
Okay.
And when we used to have family get-togethers when I was growing up, there would be my 3 siblings, my parents, myself, my aunt and my grandmother, and my 2 adopted aunts.
Yeah.
And I would sort of be up for about 15 minutes as everyone arrived. And then I'd go down to my room and read. And first my mom, and then as we got older, my sisters would sort of come down and say, Trudy, come on up.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be hiding down in the basement. Get up.
Yeah.
Be with the family.
Yeah.
And so that was because of a lack of understanding then, that there was only so much social stuff I could tolerate.
Yeah.
And it just wiped me out. Because if I'm dealing with 2 other people, say, I can at least read their the more general body language.
Yeah.
And interpret it fast enough to actually participate in the conversation.
Yeah.
If I'm seeing 3 or more other people, while I can still sort of go, oh, smile, that means they're happy or pleased about something. I can't read the more subtle traces, and I have to spend so much time and energy reading what I can, because a lot of that has to be intellectual So it takes a lot more energy to read, for me to read body language than it does for a neurotypical to read body language.
Yeah.
I end up losing the conversation.
Yeah.
So there, if this is a map of our conversation, I'm right here and they're over here. Instead of, what was sort of, I'm sort of, oh, weren't we talking about this? No, we've gone on to that type of thing. Just because it takes so long to actually read and intellectually analyze the body language.
Yeah.
And that's not something that people sort of go, oh, we can't read body language, or oh, you can read body language type of thing. People don't think about, I can read some body language,
Yeah.
but I've got to intellectually analyze it, which takes a lot more time.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not incapable of reading body language. We're just not near as good at it as someone without autism.
And I mean, we're better at reading the body language of other autistics.
Yeah.
That is something that I see all the time. We can deal better with other autistics. We can read other autistics better than we can read neurotypicals, or neurotypicals can read us.
Yeah.
And that's part of the conversation that doesn't happen often, is neurotypicals have a hard time reading us. Like my mom says, she can tell when I'm really upset because sort of my lip quivers and I start crying.
Yeah.
And she can tell when I find something funny because I laugh.
Yeah.
But other than that, she has a hard time reading what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Because for the most part, my face doesn't change, or at least not in the way that she notices.
Yeah.
And my dad does deadpan jokes, and he's good at that because he's also autistic, and so his face doesn't move very much, but he just does this absolute deadpan because he just doesn't, it's very hard to read his face type of thing. And it's even harder for neurotypicals to read his face.
I can imagine, yeah.
So yeah, that's something that's not talked about as much, is the difficulty neurotypicals have reading us.
I know I have people have a hard time reading me all the time, and they often misinterpret what I'm saying. It's like, no, that's not how I meant it, but that's, they think I meant something maybe more aggressive or more, they interpret it differently than what I was meaning,
Yeah, that's because about 55 or so percent of communication is in body language. About 40-something percent is in intonation. It's how your voice, like the tone and the speed and the clarity and the pitch, all the elements of your voice, other than the words. And something like 7 to 8% is the words you use.
Yeah.
So
I've heard that before.
I'm better at reading emotion from things typed on the screen or from a page than I am at reading emotion from someone's face.
Interesting. Okay.
And I'm better at reading emotion from someone's face than I am from just their voice.
Yeah.
I mean, some people are the opposite. Some people are better at reading voices than faces, but that's the way I am.
It's interesting. So you covered a lot about your journey. You've talked a lot about your challenges. Some more things we want to talk about. One of the next things I think we could talk about are there any sort of key messages that you want to communicate? Are there any sort of things you want to I don't know, misconception you want to dispel or anything like that?
Well, I mentioned the executive function stuff before, and
Yeah.
that I was working on a couple of years ago. The key messages I'm focusing on lately is stimming, which is the various different fidgets that you use, and eye contact. Eye contact being a big one.
Yeah.
The thing about eye contact is, don't make us make it.
No.
A lot of the reasons autistics have trouble making eye contact, there are two main reasons that I've heard about. Like, I mean, there might be others, but
yeah,
the people have communicated to me there are two main reasons. One, there's an awful lot of information coming from one's eyes.
Yeah.
The size of the pupil, where you're looking, there's a whole bunch of information there. And there's only so much information the brain can take in.
Yeah.
And so much it can process at once. And we have issues with that in the first place.
Yeah.
Our brain processing works differently because our neurological wiring is different. But also, we have so much information coming in from the environment as it is because of our sensory issues.
Yeah.
That having to focus on something that gives so much more information, there are a lot of people who, if you're making eye contact, they have no clue what you're saying because they can't process it.
Yeah.
There's just not enough processing capability in the brain to do that.
Yeah.
As well as make eye contact. And the other thing is having someone look straight at you, look you in the eyes, can be a predatory feel. Like, I mean, there are reasons why cats don't like to look people in the eyes and why dogs don't like to look people in the eyes. It's because that can give them an impression of being a predator, of challenge.
Yep.
And that's the other thing I've heard from other autistics is it makes you feel as though you're being challenged. It makes you feel as though you're being preyed upon. Now, I've never really had any trouble making eye contact, but that's about the one thing I've never had trouble with.
Yeah.
And the other thing, talking about stimming, is in some ways it's eye contact sort of goes along with this because we need to be able to stim in order to focus.
Absolutely, we do.
Stimming is useful for concentration, for self-soothing. If we're agitated, we're on the edge of a meltdown or sensory overload, stimming can often sort of bring us back from the brink so that we don't go over. It can be, and focusing so that, you know how often you'll see neurotypicals listening to something, they're tapping their fingers or fidgeting with a pen or whatnot. That's stimming.
Yeah.
And I mean, everyone does it, but for autistics and for people with ADHD as well.
Yeah.
We need to be able to do that in order to focus.
Yeah.
Most of our attention on what we need to focus on. So on learning or listening or writing a test or whatever. That helps us. And I mean, like I said, it's not just the stereotypical things of rocking or flapping one's hands.
No.
It can be almost anything. As a child, I used to chew on my knuckle.
Ouch.
Yeah, which brings us to self-harmful stims.
Yeah.
And something I've been working on over the last couple of years is how to change self-harmful stims, because you don't want people harming themselves.
No.
But stims are needed for us. As I said, for the focus, for the self-soothing, for sensory stability sometimes. I love the feel of taking off in a plane or of driving along the highway, because that speed and the G-force just helps my vestibular sense sort of reestablish itself. Okay, this is what's normal.
Yeah.
So quite often when someone's doing a stim that self-harms, it's because whatever that stim is hitting off sensory things that they need.
Yeah.
And you don't want to stop the stimming. That is so important. You don't want to stop it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's so necessary. But if someone's doing a self-harmful stim, you want to change it.
Yeah.
And I've got something on my blog that I sort of went through. Okay, this is one idea for how you can change a self-harmful stim, that basically says, okay, figure out what sensory modes it's hitting. Like, is it touch? Is it interoception? Is it moving, how your body moves? Is different parts or whatnot? Is it pressure? Is it whatever? Things like that. And then try to make sure you change it in steps, but still hit all the necessary sensory modes.
Yeah.
And just sort of the most harmful, try to reduce the amount of harm that's going on.
That's good.
But do not stop the stims.
I know for me, I'll do things I've done for years. I'll play with my pillowcase at night, or I'll play like with, I'll pull out my shirt if it's not too thick, and I'll play with, my men's button-up shirt. So I'll pull it out, I'll play with the bottom of it. I fidget with pens. I did that for years and didn't even know it was not everybody did that. It was an autistic thing. It wasn't until years later that I started realizing, oh, that's why I did that,
Yeah. I play with my hair. I rub my hand along different textures. I'm tactile, touch sense. I'm very sensory seeking. I'm always looking for things to touch and feel. The top I'm wearing today has ridges forming patterns, and it's what I call my stimmy top.
Cool. Good. Well, that's really good. Now, you've talked about your blog, and maybe you could talk a little more about your blog and what it is and what you do on there and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. I'm just gonna share my screen here.
Sounds good.
So you can see what it looks like. So this is the front page of my blog here, and you can see the URL. And in it, I basically talk about various things having to do with autism. I've got a list of posts in order here.
Yeah.
And I talk about things like my diagnosis, behaviors and traits, my difficulty making decisions and prioritizing.
Yeah.
Talk about meltdowns. I talk about coping mechanisms. I talk about sensory issues.
Wow, you've covered everything.
I talk about various positive aspects of autism.
Yeah.
I talk about advocacy. And like I said, I've been doing it since 2013. Oh yes, this is the new cat. This is Tarma.
Oh, hi, kitty cat.
But I've been doing this since 2013, and I don't update all that often of late.
Yeah.
Like my last post was in December talking about a local pub that my youngest sister had taken me to, which is an excellent pub here in St. John's if you're autistic, if you have sensory
cool.
issues, or if you just want to play games. It's like a game pub,
Cool.
kind of like the board game cafes that people have, only it's a pub.
Yeah.
So yeah, I cover all sorts of things in my blog that have to do with autism or autism advocacy type of thing.
Awesome.
And I've also got links to a whole bunch of resources that people can use to learn more about autism, like blogs by both other autistics and by parents of autistics, whom I think really do a good job in handling, in being parents.
Yeah. Cool. Now, kind of jumping around the order of my interview questions here and trying to kind of go with the flow. So now I was thinking maybe you could talk a little more about, you've talked about some of your advocacy, you've talked about your blog, and we can share more about resources at the end. It's kind of a good way to end off. Maybe talk a little more about your self-advocacy work. What are the organizations you're with, and what are you trying to achieve? And I guess a big one is, what are some of your proudest accomplishments so far in self-advocacy?
Okay. So, as you know, but most of our audience probably does not, my main start to advocacy was when we were both on the Canadian Autism Partnership Project Advisory Group. I came into the advisory group of Autism Canada when it first formed, and through the Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorder Alliance, nice long term. There's a reason we just call it CASDA.
Yeah.
Through CASDA and through Autism Canada, we came onto the advisory group there.
Yeah.
And yes, for anyone interested, that's how Corey and I first met. And we worked really hard over that year to make the Canadian Autism Partnership a reality. It's a pity that it didn't get pushed through.
No, unfortunately.
But I stayed with CASDA. I did presentations at their leadership summit, both in 2017 and 2018. The 2017 was all about being on the advisory group and what sort of work we'd done and how it had helped us, and how we hoped it would proceed later on. And the 2018 talk was about burnout.
Cool.
And also in 2018, I was elected onto the board of the Autism Society for Newfoundland and Labrador.
Great accomplishment.
So that I was pleased about. I was pleased that people sort of had recognized the work that I was doing with CASDA and stuff. And I'm also on the province's Autism Action Council. Newfoundland and Labrador came out with an autism action plan that they want to do sort of a 3-year plan, which is probably going to be delayed somewhat because of COVID-19.
Yeah,
but in terms of making Newfoundland and Labrador more accessible, and the services more accessible and broader for autistics, including things like getting rid of the IQ less than 70 issue.
Yeah.
And So the Autism Action Council's responsibility is to review what's going on with that plan, and are we making our targets, are we making our deadlines, and just sort of act as a monitor as the province sort of slowly builds up capacity and ability to help. And also, on to our other project. Both Corey and I are members of a group of us, all of us who met through the Canadian Autism Partnership Project. We are working now on creating an autistic organization the goal is to sort of be a middleman between autistics and researchers and policymakers. The Canadian Autism, tripping over my tongue. The Canadian Association for Autistic Consensus, collaboration.
Collaboration, yeah.
Yeah, we went through a couple of iterations of the name. So the Canadian Association for Autistic Collaboration. And we've just started working on that. Our website is minimal at the moment, and our resources, we're slowly building them up. We're hoping to, within the next couple of years, actually be a viable organization with members and being able to sort of do things like go to researchers and say, okay, we've got information from the autistics in this area, from the adult and teenage autistics in this area, and this is what our concerns are. This is what sort of research projects they're looking for. This is what we need in terms of research. And be able to go from researchers to our membership and sort of say, these particular research projects are looking for autistics to participate in various different ways, and sort of being on the research team, being sort of subjects of research like interviewees and such, looking at the results of our project and helping us analyze and set them out, all the various different stages of research. So what's called patient-oriented research, where the people involved are a part of the research from the very beginning, looking even at what the research question is. So, and also being able to go to policymakers and say, so we've done surveys and such of this region of Canada, and they're telling us that the main issues they are concerned with are this, this, and this.
Yeah.
So we really need you to look at these 3 issues type of thing, and that's where their priorities are. That's what they want you to deal with.
Yeah.
So that is another thing that I'm very proud that we're working on.
Yeah, I know. I'm really looking forward to the future of the CAAC and hoping that we can in time accomplish great things.
Yes. And in fact, I'm just sharing my screen again here. This is our website. Here's the URL there. And this is what we're basically trying to do. As I said, it's a very minimal website at the moment. We've got our main page, and we've got one video up there about research stages, but we're working on it.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. So now a couple more questions. We're getting close to the end here, I think. In general, what can neurotypicals do to be more accepting of autistic people? What can autistic people do to make their voices heard and accepted in the community, the workplace, amongst family, friends, and so on?
I would say the most important thing neurotypicals can do is sit back and listen. Don't try to speak over us. Don't don't necessarily listen to the so-called experts.
Yeah.
Because one of the main problems, and I actually had an interview last week where I got a spread in the various Atlantic papers talking about what being adult autistic is like and such. And this was one of the points that got across really well, is looking from the outside, you don't necessarily know what's going on.
No.
All you can see is the behavior. So you don't know why the behavior is happening. All you can do is guess. You really need to, in order to really understand us, you need to listen to our point of view. You need to listen to what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
And Canada, at least, is actually slowly coming more and more towards that in the disability community, is sort of listening to the people who do have the conditions, who are the ones who live with things. But there's still a way to go. And that I think is really the most important thing neurotypicals need to take into account, is we're the ones who know what things are like. We're the ones who have experienced this. So please listen to us when we tell you things.
Yeah.
In terms of,
sorry, go ahead.
In terms of other autistics getting their voices heard more, one thing I highly recommend is go to your local autism society and find out, are there any autistics on the board? Are there any autistics actually working there? Like Corey works for AutismBC.
Yeah.
Sort of go and get information from them. How can you participate? How can you be involved more with your local autism society? Yeah. And also look for other organizations. Like one of the things over the next couple of years, the Canadian Association for Autistic Collaboration is going to be looking for people to be members, to tell their stories, to have their voices heard. So we're going to be, hopefully within the next year or two, we're going to be one of those organizations looking for autistics to participate. And I know there are other organizations in various provinces. In BC, you've got the Pacific Center for Family Studies, or whatever it's called. I can't remember the exact title.
Where is that?
The Pacific Family Autism Center or something?
BC, Pacific Autism Family Network.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
So go there and ask, sort of, do you have autistics on the board? Do you have autistics employed? How can I participate in various events and such that you're running? That type of thing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, those are all really good questions. I thought we'd end here. Do you have any books or resources that you recommend for audience, which is both neurotypicals and autistics?
I do indeed. And we're going to share the screen again.
Sure.
I've pulled up a bunch of different ones for people to look at. Here we've got the Actually Autistic blogs list. And this is a list. This is a website that does a list of blogs by autistics, by adult autistics. And there's a whole bunch of different blogs here. There are blogs by nonverbal autistics. There are blogs by verbal autistics. All kinds of things. Various different focuses. It's basically a list of resources that you can use.
Yeah.
There's that. If you are autistic, particularly if you are a woman and or you are a parent. Musings of an Aspie is an excellent blog to look at. She hasn't written anything over the last few years because she's just had a lot of trouble with words over the last few years. But she talks about, she's the one I got most of the information on executive function from. She talks about being the mother of a neurotypical daughter. She talks about being diagnosed as an adult.
Yeah.
She talks about various different elements of dealing with life as an autistic. And she's actually got 2 books published. I Think I Might Be Autistic, which is for adults who think they may be on the spectrum but aren't sure.
Yeah.
Or who are pretty sure they're on the spectrum, but they just want some support in figuring out things.
Yeah.
It's not just about diagnosis. It also goes into some of the, I believe, basics of what autism is about. And Nerdy, Shy, and Socially Inappropriate, which is basically a memoir type style one.
Cool.
And yeah, this is the 2 books on Amazon.ca.
Cool.
And then there's The Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, which it's basically like an anthology. It has a lot of autistic contributors as well as some neurotypical parent contributors.
Cool.
Unstrained Mind is sort of on the stronger end of things in terms of autistic advocacy. They are trans. They just recently transitioned. And they have had a number of other issues involved over the years. But if you really want to look at someone who's had a lot of issues, someone who's had to deal with things like hearing issues, with high anxiety issues, and someone who is strongly advocates for autistics and autistic involvement, Unstrained Mind is a fairly good resource. And then a few resources for parents in particular. We Are Like Your Child is an excellent site for parents to go to, because it's got basically, it's sort of an anthology of posts by autistic adults who have undergone things that parents are always posting about, things that when you see us today, you might not realize that when this person was 5 years old, they had toileting issues, they couldn't speak, all the sort of severe issues that parents go, well, you're not like my child. This is an excellent site for, yes, we are, and here are some things to help deal with these issues that you're running into, and here's some hope for you. Things can change and things will change as your child grows older. Another thing is a diary of a mom. Her older daughter is autistic, an autistic extrovert, in fact. She mentions that a lot of things she's now got online on Facebook as opposed to the blog. But the blog is an excellent resource in terms of past issues. And she's got a lot of things about schooling, about echolalia, about how her autistic daughter has sensory issues with coughing. So when her other daughter gets sick, there are problems, type of thing, and how that gets dealt with. And those would be sort of some preliminary resources to look at in terms of information for both autistics and neurotypicals.
Sounds like a lot of really good information. And most of these sites, in fact, I don't think I knew of any of these sites, so that's actually quite good. So Trudy, I'm just wondering before we wrap things up, is there anything else I missed? Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that you want to make sure that we get that we cover?
No, I think we've covered pretty much some pretty important stuff, and I don't want your people to have to cut too much anyway. So I'd say we're pretty much done on what we wanted to get across.
Okay, well, thank you, Trudy, for taking the time to talk with me, and yeah, hopefully we can get some of those resources you posted listed on our social media so people can follow them themselves. So I was talking with Trudy Goold from St. John's, Newfoundland, autistic self-advocate, and let me rephrase that. Trudy, I don't know where Judy came from. Trudy, I appreciate you sharing your journey with us and sharing your story. And yeah, and thank you for your heartfelt sharing, and look forward to talking to you as we obviously work together on other things, and people will learn something from our talk today.
It was my pleasure.
Okay.
And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Trudy.